Chapter 7, Section 8 is about special products that we're going to see when we're multiplying polynomials. So these are going to be very specific examples of different special cases that you're going to see when we're multiplying these different types of polynomials. Specifically, the ones that we're going to see today is when you're multiplying two different types of binomials. So we're going to talk about really 3 cases total in this section, but the first 2 that I'm going to go over are very similar to each other in just kind of how they work and how they look. So the first one is called the square of a sum. So what this means is that you have the same quantity, or you have a single quantity here that has a plus sign in between the 2 terms, and then it's being squared. What that means for expanding it is that you have the same binomial twice. So you're writing out 2 things in parentheses and they look the exact same. So it could be x plus 5, x plus 5. Could be y minus 2, y minus 2. Could be 2x plus 5, 2x plus 5. So those are the examples that we're going to start with. Now specifically this first one's going to be talking about the sum. So they're all going to have plus signs. In a little bit we'll talk about the one that I just said with the minus sign and how that is just slightly different than the sum. The rules are fairly simple when you're doing these types of problems. You could almost kind of consider these as being kind of like shortcuts for these types of binomials that we're multiplying. What you're going to do is square your first term. So the first thing that comes inside the parentheses, you're going to square that. Then you're going to take the 2 terms inside the parentheses. You're going to multiply them together, but then you're also going to have to double them. So you're going to have to increase it by taking it times 2 or thinking about adding it to itself. And then step 3 is to square the last term, which would be that second piece inside of your parentheses. So let me show you some examples here. This first one you have x plus 3 squared, which this really means that you were taking x plus 3 times x plus 3. Okay? Now, the shortcut says that I'm going to square my first term. My first term is that x. So I'm going to take x, I'm going to square it. Sometimes students like to put it in parentheses just in case that there's something included with the x, like a number sitting in front. This one you don't necessarily have to do this step for because it would just be written as x squared since there's just a 1 sitting in front of that x. For step 2, for the middle term, you're going to multiply the 2 terms on the inside. So you're going to take the x and the 3, you're going to multiply them. But then you're also going to have to double it. So doubling it means that you take it times 2. So I'm just going to write times 2 in there as well. So all of these are going to have a times 2 included when you're multiplying those 2 terms together. And there's lots of different ways that you might see somebody write that. Like sometimes people will write it like this instead, 2 and then times 3x instead, which means the same thing. Sometimes I feel like for some students it helps for them to see 2 terms specifically being multiplied and then also multiplied by that 2. But if what I wrote up here, the 2 and then in parentheses with 3x, makes sense to you, then you can always write it that way as well. Okay, and then step 3 is to square the last term. The last term is that 3 at the end of the parentheses, so we're going to do plus. Then I do like to put it in parentheses as well, just like I did with the x. And again, that's more just for future problems that you might run into where the examples get maybe a little bit more complicated. So they kind of start to stretch out more, or they have more terms that you're dealing with. So to simplify this then, x squared would just be x squared. And then plus x times 3, like I said, could be written as 3x. And then you're taking it times 2 would make that become 6x. And then plus 3 squared becomes 9. And so this is going to be your answer right here. Now, could you have found the exact same answer by just multiplying them like you did in the previous section? Yes, you could do either your box method or you could be multiplying using your distributive property again. But these are specific special products that allow us to use these shortcuts. So it's okay for you to also know how to use the shortcut so that you can just really save yourself a little bit of time, not have to do all that process of drawing it in the box method or doing all of your different arrows. All right, so for the second example I have here, we've got 2x plus 5 squared. So again, you can think of that as 2x plus 5 times 2x plus 5. What I'm going to do is square my first term. So I'm going to take that 2x and square it. And this is exactly why I've been putting it in parentheses, because when I go to simplify, you'll have to remember that that 2 on the outside here is going to have to go to the big 2, and it's going to have to go to the x. So you're going to have to distribute that exponent into the parentheses there. Continuing on with our steps, step 2 is to take your two terms and multiply them together. So take 2x times 5, and then double it, so take it times 2. And then take the 5 and square that. That's kind of what it looks like written out the long way. Now we're going to simplify. So 2 squared, because that 2 goes inside, that becomes 4. And then you have x squared plus 2x times 5 would be 10x, times another 2 would be 20x, and then 5 squared would be 25. And so that's the final answer. So now that you've seen a couple of different types of examples here, what I want you to do is take a few minutes and do those two practice problems. All right, let's go ahead and go through these two examples here. So for the first one, I would have done x squared, which becomes just x squared. Then you would have taken x times 4, which is 4x, but then you need to double that, so it becomes 8x for your middle term. And then you square the 4 and you get 16. For this one over here, you take 3x squared, which would be 9x squared. Then you multiply 3x and the 7, which is 21x. Then you had to double it, so it became 42x in the middle. And then you square the 7, and that became 49. This next example is very similar to that one that we just talked about, but this one's going to have a subtraction sign instead of a plus sign. And that's only going to change one little thing. On all of those examples up above, you saw that they all had plus signs. It was x squared plus the x term and then plus a number. These ones are going to be the same as far as like how we do the steps. The same 3 steps are going to happen. It's just that the middle sign now, so that term in front of the x, is always going to be negative for these types of problems. So we can kind of follow the same rules that we did where we take the first term, which is the 3x, and we square that. Again, you can put that in parentheses, and that's going to come to be 9x squared. Then you're going to take those, well, I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit. I'm going to take this 5 and square that. So 5 squared, and that's how we get the 25. And then for the middle, you're still taking those two terms, 3x and 5. You're multiplying them. And then you have to double it. I'm running out of room. Let me rewrite that. So we take 3 times x times 5. Sorry, 3x times 5 times 2. That's better. And then I had that 5 squared over here, which is how I got the 25. And then in front of this middle term, there should always be a minus sign. And so if I simplify that, 3x times 5 is 15x times 2 is how we get the 30x. So you can see how it follows the same shortcut. The only difference is that we do have the minus sign here in front of that middle term. Now, sometimes students wonder, like, why is that one still a plus sign? Because when we saw up above with the plus sign, it makes sense that everything's positive. Sometimes students look at this and they think, well, shouldn't it just be minus minus because this has a minus sign? But I want you to ask yourself, if you look at that last term, what do you see? Hopefully you see that it says negative 5. So if I'm taking negative 5 times negative 5, I should get a positive 25. So the reason why that last sign stays positive is because a negative times a negative equals a positive. Okay, so why don't you guys go ahead and practice. Okay, so for this one, you should have squared that 2x, so 2x squared would have given it, excuse me, 4x squared. Then you should multiply the two terms together, 2x times 7, and then double that, and it should have a minus sign in front of it, so that should have been minus 28x. And then the last term is that negative 7 squared, which is a positive 49. One more case to talk about here, and this one does look a little bit different than the ones that we've been seeing. The other ones had the same sign, and it was like the same quantity twice. This one, you're going to have the same terms, so you'll have like an x first and then like a 2 second, but instead of having a plus sign in both of them or a minus sign in both of them, you're going to have a plus and a minus sign, so you're going to have both of those signs happening here. This is called the product of a sum and a difference, or in the future, you'll maybe hear teachers refer to it as the difference of two squares, okay? Because we're taking these two items that have a plus and a minus sign, and we're multiplying them together. Now, this one's kind of a little bit extra, I would say special compared to those last ones, because we have those opposite signs. It's going to cause that the middle terms cancel. So really what you can do to do these ones is you can square the first term, or you can think of number here. It says number. You can think of this as like a term instead, so it might be better if you just replace that with term. And then you're going to subtract, always subtract, the square of the second term. So if you want to add those words in there, that might kind of clarify, because then it kind of sounds a little bit like what we were just doing. So you're going to take the first piece in your parentheses, you're going to square that, and you're going to have a minus sign, and you're going to square the second piece of the parentheses, and you're done. Okay? Now you can see down here, they're showing you in this example explicitly like what's happening here, and they're showing you why you no longer have the middle term. If I take that first x and I do my arrows and I multiply it over here, that's how I get this x squared minus 5x to get me started. Then if I do a second set of distribution, I get 5x, this time positive, and then minus 25. And if you look at these middle two terms here, one's negative and one's positive, so they're going to cancel each other out, and that's why we're left with x squared minus 25. So, to kind of shortcut this, instead of having to do all those arrows, we can instead look and see, okay, what's my first term? The x. So I square that. Okay, that's x squared. And then I look at my second term, which is the 5's. Okay, square those, and that gives me 25. And I put a minus sign in the middle. And that's exactly what we got over there. Now, this one looks just a little bit different because instead of just saying x minus 3 and x plus 3, it says 2x. But you saw some of these examples on the previous page. They work the exact same way. So we're going to take 2x and square it. So 2x times 2x, which is going to be 4x squared. Then we're going to square the last term, 3 and 3, which is 9, and we're going to put a minus sign in the middle. So you get 4x squared minus 9. So I want you guys to take a couple minutes and do those two practice problems. All right, let's go through these two here. So the first one, you should have taken the x squared, which gives you x squared, and then squared the 6, which would give you 36. So x squared minus 36. For the second one, you take the 5x squared, which leaves you with 25x squared, and then you square the 2, which is a 4, and you write minus